So this video is probably really geared towards people thinking and becoming, a professor, or maybe they're thinking of becoming a teacher. It's going to be biased, obviously, towards higher education because that's what I know. Although, after making many life decisions and seeing how this sort of plays out and the differences between, what I do and what teachers do, I probably have a fair bit of understanding about this at this moment. Probably not the best, but better than average. So I thought I'd talk about this a little bit, right? So most people think that teachers and professors, or professors are teachers, and that is absolutely not true in any sort of way. There's huge differences between them, and there is substantial differences between them. So the similarities between teachers and professors are the fact that they sometimes, not always, teach students. So professors teach students, not always. They grade students' work, not always. Most are developmental, not always. And teachers and professors often have to do service. So that is probably more true than any of those other ones. So they have to join meetings and committees and sort of run the show at the different schools that they're at, the institutions that they're at. So in terms of the differences between a teacher and a professor, and so what I'm talking about here, professor is a university professor. I should have mentioned that before, where they're in a major university and they're doing research and things like that, and a teacher is working at high school, or working in an elementary school. The differences are probably a little bit more stark there between elementary school and high school. But compare us to somebody that's working in a high school, and I'm not saying anyone is better than the other. I'm just saying that there is differences between them, and they're just different career choices that you have to sort of think about. So in terms of a professor and teaching, there is not a lot of similarities after all of those different things, right? So I just talked about that they sometimes teach students, not always, that they grade students' work, not always, and that they are developmental with other people, not always. So teaching is only for the standard professor that's out there. Teaching is only 1/3 of our job. That is kind of the standard thing. So we have two other things that we have to do. 1/3 should be service, and another third should be it should be research. And those components are what makes up what a professor does. And generally, depending on what you're doing, those things change a lot in the institutions that you're at. Some professors just do 100% research and they'll never teach. Some professors will do a lot of service and then they'll work in a dean's office, for example. And a small fraction of professors will just do teaching and that's it. However, they generally are not tenure-track professors at research universities. So the major universities that you've heard about, where it's just not going to be that way. They in order to get accreditation, and from the different bodies that are accrediting the different universities and stuff, you need to do this component where you're doing teaching, research, and service. And the more that they are doing that, the more sort of standard that they are, right? So teaching is only a small fraction of what we do. And the sort of more successful you become as a professor, the less teaching you're gonna do. It's just kind of what the nature of it is. Most professors, most tenure-track professors, especially tenure-track professors, have to do primarily research, and they're going to focus on that. And the ones that do extremely well, they're going to do 100% research and very little teaching. And the ones that do, the ones that are sort of top of their game, they're going to just do less and less teaching over time, unless they really like to do it and they choose to do it. That is sort of part of their life choices, right? The key thing that a lot of people don't figure out is we're not trained as well as teachers, I think, in teaching, although it's important for many of us, but it's just not part of what we are trained in. What we're trained in is how to do research, and that's where we spend 7, 8, 9, 10 years doing is doing research and thinking about ideas rather than sort of the teaching component of that. It's unfortunate that we don't get a lot of courses in teaching. However, I understand why. We have to prioritize what we're going to do in the rest of our career, and the teaching component of it tends to be a little less in terms of the importance than it is the research game. And that's just what the current norms are right now. Maybe that'll change in the future, but the current norms is that we have to really focus on research. It's really tough to do. And the reason is that the field is very competitive, and so we have to compete at that stage. It's just kind of the way it is, right? It's not saying it's right or wrong. It's just the way it is. So the other thing to do, or to think about, is that professors will lose their job. So if you're a tenure track professor, you're going to lose your job if you don't do research, if you're not writing and doing things related to research. It's just that's the standard. You are going to lose your job if you just focus on teaching and you do well at teaching. It's just not going to work out for you in your favor. Now you can become more of a teaching professor if you do that, and that's fine. And that's actually a wonderful career. But at the same time, it is not the sort of standard tenure track path to go into do research that way. So you have to do research along the way. The other thing is that, professors are going to interact differently with different people, right? We're going to interact a lot more with students, both undergraduate and graduate students, but teachers tend to interact a lot more with parents and their children that way, right? So if the relationship is different, you're doing a lot more interacting with parents in terms of resolving conflict and things. But with professors, we interact with students that are hopefully mature enough that can do things on their own and make decisions on their own, right? Although maybe it's changing now with sort of different generations, but at the same time, that's what happens, right? We interact a lot more with students because they become more mature. They're young adults and they're doing well for themselves. And I try to treat everybody as if they're an adult and can make their own decisions and stuff like that. So the other thing to think about is teachers are going to be focused, because they're focused on teaching. They're going to be focused on doing things that are more related to that. And so they're probably going to do a lot more, graded assignments and things, and actually grade the work and go through the work themselves. Whereas some professors have more resources to get other people to do those things, right? So we can get teaching assistants, for example, to do some of the grading and things like that, versus, and that's the reason is that our main goal is to do research and to produce more research. So all that stuff that takes away from doing research, we try to find other people to do those things, right? That's just kind of a good way to specialize and a good way to prioritize what we're doing, right? So doing those things are really important. And I think the last thing that I wanted to point out between teachers and professors is that the teaching career is a little less competitive, actually a lot less competitive than it is to become a professor. If you are a professor, you have to compete with everybody around the world. It's not just your local area. It's not just a local university that you're competing with, but your research has to compete with everybody at every institution. It's just by the nature of what science is, because we build on all available knowledge. So we have to be as good as somebody. So I'm in Florida. I have to be as good as somebody in New York, and as good as somebody that's in France. I have to be as good as somebody that's in Somalia, whatever it is, right? I have to be doing I have to compete with everybody around the world. And so that just makes it a lot more competitive than it is to become a teacher and to do well. And so that means, jobs are, the competition makes sure that the jobs are a lot more tighter. It's harder to get a professor job. Actually really hard to get a professor job. And compared to a teaching job, for example, it's a lot more easier to do that. Not to say it's easy, but it's just easier. We have to move often. Professors move all around the world. I moved from, Canada to Florida. and that is normal. In fact, that's probably not a big move for most professors that are in the career. Lots of people move from continents. That's normal too. So expect that kind of stuff to happen. It's just a lot more sort of competitive because of this sort of science nature, of the global nature of science, than teaching. And all of our actions are driven by research and producing more research than teaching would be. There's some teachers that do research, but it is way less common than professors where it is our main goal to do research and to push ideas forward. So if you like these videos, give me a thumbs up, do subscribe.